The crystalline spires of the Galactic Council station gleamed against the starfield backdrop as Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen adjusted her dress uniform one final time. The fabric felt foreign against her skin after months of combat fatigues. But first impressions mattered, especially when humanity's future hung in the balance. "Remember, Commander," Admiral Harrison's voice crackled through her comm unit, "this is our only shot. The Zephyrians control 3 critical trade routes, and their military technology could tip the balance in the Void War, whatever it takes to secure their alliance. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Sarah nodded, though the Admiral couldn't see her through the sealed diplomatic transport. "Understood, sir. Though I still don't understand why they specifically requested someone with combat experience for a diplomatic mission. Intel suggests they respect strength above all else. Your record in the Proxima campaign should impress them." The transport shuddered as it docked with the station's diplomatic wing. Through the viewport, Sarah caught her first glimpse of the Kulvi. Zephyrian delegation, tall, angular beings with skin that seemed to shift between silver and deep blue, their movements precise and economical. Each wore what appeared to be ceremonial armor, despite the peaceful nature of the meeting. "Docking complete," announced the pilot. "You're cleared for transfer, Commander. Good luck." Sarah straightened her shoulders and stepped through the airlock into a world that challenged every assumption she'd held about alien cultures. The corridor beyond was stark, utilitarian, lined with what looked like weapons displays. Her military training automatically cataloged potential threats: energy blade mountings, projectile weapon configurations, defensive shield generators. A Zephyrian approached, his armor more elaborate than the others, indicating high rank. When he spoke, his voice carried the mechanical precision of a universal translator. "Human Chun Sarah. I am War Commander Thexri of the Zephyrian hegemony. You will follow." No pleasantries, no diplomatic protocol. Sarah fell into step behind him, noting how every other Zephyrian they passed stood at rigid attention. The atmosphere felt more like a military inspection than a diplomatic reception. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They entered a vast chamber dominated by a triangular table. 7 Zephyrians sat along 2 sides, leaving the third side clearly the defendant's position for Sarah. She recognized the setup from her tactical training. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a tribunal. "Human Chun Sarah, War Commander Thexri," announced, taking his seat at the table's apex. "You will present humanity's petition for alliance with the Zephyrian hegemony." Sarah remained standing, a subtle assertion of equality that caused several Zephyrians to shift uncomfortably. She'd spent the journey studying their cultural briefings, but something felt off about the entire situation. "Honored War Commander," she began, using the formal address her briefings had specified. "Humanity seeks partnership with the Zephyrian hegemony based on mutual benefit and shared strategic interests." Partnership? The word seemed to amuse Thexri. "Humans possess no technology we desire, no resources we require, no military strength we respect. What can your species offer that we cannot take?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah felt her combat instincts stirring. This was interrogation, not diplomacy. But Admiral Harrison's words echoed in her mind. "Whatever it takes." "Our species offers innovation, adaptability, and determination," she replied. "We've proven ourselves capable of rapid technological advancement and effective military action when necessary." "The Proxima campaigns," observed another Zephyrian, her voice carrying notes of professional interest. "You commanded the third wave assault on the high fortifications. Acceptable tactical awareness for a primitive species." Sarah bristled at the condescension but maintained her composure. We achieved our objectives with minimal casualties. Because you were fortunate, War Commander Zephyrian interjected. The Hive underestimated your willingness to sacrifice yourselves. That will not happen again. The interrogation continued for what felt like hours. Each question probed humanity's weaknesses, military capabilities, and technological limitations. Sarah answered as honestly as she could while protecting classified information, but the Zephyrians' attitude remained dismissive. Finally, Zephyrian leaned forward. The Zephyrian hegemony has reviewed humanity's petition. Your species shows potential as auxiliary forces in our expansion campaigns. We offer you the position of client state protection in exchange for military service and resource extraction rights. Client state? Sarah's diplomatic training warred with her sense of justice. We're seeking partnership, not vassalage. You misunderstand your position, human Chun Sarah. This is not a negotiation. This is an offer of survival. Accept our terms, or face the consequences of defying the hegemony. The other Zephyrians nodded in agreement, their silver-blue skin shifting to deeper, more aggressive hues. Sarah realized she'd walked into a trap humanity hadn't been invited to negotiate an alliance. But to surrender their independence, her mind raced through options. She could accept the terms and return to Earth with some form of protection for her species, even if it meant generations of servitude. She could reject the offer and likely trigger a war humanity couldn't win. Or, War Commander Zephyrian, she said, her voice carefully controlled. I appreciate the time you've taken to hear our petition. However, I believe there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about what humanity seeks. Enlighten us, Zephyrian replied, his tone suggesting he expected nothing of value. Sarah took a breath, abandoning her prepared diplomatic script. We're not here to beg for protection or to surrender our autonomy. We came here because we believe the Zephyrian hegemony and humanity could accomplish more together than either could alone. But that requires mutual respect. Respect is earned through strength, the female Zephyrian observed. What strength do humans possess that demands our respect? This was the moment Sarah had been trained for, though not in any diplomatic academy. This was the moment when everything she'd learned in combat about leadership, about inspiration, about the power of human determination, would matter more than any negotiation tactic. Our strength isn't just in our weapons or our technology, she said, moving around the table with deliberate confidence. It's in our ability to see potential where others see problems. It's in our willingness to take risks that others consider foolish. It's in our refusal to accept that the way things are is the way they must always be. She stopped directly across from Zephyrian, meeting his alien gaze without flinching. You see us as primitives because we haven't conquered half the galaxy. But we see the galaxy as it could be, a place where different species don't just coexist, but thrive together. Where diversity of thought and culture creates strength instead of weakness. Idealistic nonsense, Zephyrian dismissed. The galaxy is ruled by power, not dreams. Is it? Sarah challenged. Then why hasn't the hegemony won the Void War? You have superior technology, larger fleets, more resources. Yet you're locked in. Stalemate with the consortium. Maybe what you need isn't more power, maybe you need a different perspective. For the first time since the meeting began, the Zephyrians exchanged uncertain glances. Sarah pressed her advantage. Humans have a saying, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. The hegemony has been fighting the same way for centuries. We've been in space for less than 100 years, and we've already developed tactics that surprised everyone, including ourselves. Your point, human Chun Sarah? Zephyrian's voice carried a note of genuine curiosity. My point is that partnership isn't about one species dominating another. It's about combining different strengths to achieve something neither could manage alone. You have the power and the technology. We have the innovation and the adaptability. Together, we could end the Void War instead of just continuing it. The chamber fell silent. Sarah could feel the weight of 7 alien gazes evaluating her words, her bearing, her species' worthiness. Everything depended on what happened next. War-Commander. Zephyrian stood slowly, his movements deliberate and measured. You speak of partnership, human Chun Sarah. But you have not demonstrated what you offer beyond words. What demonstration would you require? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Combat, Zephyrian replied, confirming her fears. The hegemony respects only those who prove themselves in battle. If humanity seeks partnership, you must face our champion in single combat. Sarah's heart sank. She was a competent fighter, but she was a naval officer, not a ground combat specialist. And from what she'd read about Zephyrian biology, their species was naturally stronger and faster than humans. I accept, she said without hesitation. The word surprised even her, but she knew she had no choice. This was why they'd sent someone with combat experience, not to impress the Zephyrians with her record, but to potentially die for humanity's future. Excellent, Zephyrian said, his skin shifting to what might have been pleasure. The trial will commence in 1 standard hour. You may prepare yourself. As the Zephyrians filed out of the chamber, Sarah was left alone with her thoughts and the weight of her decision. She'd committed herself to single combat against an alien warrior, with humanity's independence hanging in balance. But as she began her preparations, removing her dress uniform and donning the basic combat gear she'd brought, Sarah felt something she hadn't expected: hope. Not because she thought she could win, the odds were heavily against her, but because she'd finally understood what made humans different. Every other species the Zephyrians had encountered had either submitted to their power or been crushed by it, but humans. Humans had the audacity to suggest there might be a better way. They had the courage to risk everything for the possibility of something greater. As she checked her equipment one final time, Sarah smiled grimly. Win or lose, she was about to show the Zephyrians what human determination really looked like. The combat arena was a stark circular chamber with walls of polished metal that reflected the harsh lighting from above. Sarah entered through one door as her opponent emerged from another, a Zephyrian warrior whose armor was more elaborate than any she'd seen, whose movements spoke of decades of combat experience. I am Champion Crackled, the warrior announced, his voice carrying the weight of countless victories. You face the finest warrior of the hegemony, human Chun Sarah. Do you wish to withdraw your petition and accept client status? Sarah drew her combat knife, the only weapon she'd been permitted, and settled into a defensive stance. I represent humanity's desire for partnership, Champion Crackled. I will not withdraw. The champion's acknowledgement was barely perceptible before he struck. Sarah had fought fast opponents before, but Crackled moved with inhuman speed and precision. His first blow, delivered with the flat of his energy blade, sent her sprawling across the arena floor. You cannot win this combat, he said, advancing with predatory grace. Surrender now and die quickly. Sarah rolled aside as his blade struck the floor where she'd been lying, the energy weapon leaving a smoking gouge in the metal. She came up running, using the arena's circular layout to maintain distance while she studied his fighting style. Crackled was technically perfect, every movement efficient, every attack precisely calculated. He fought like a machine, relying on superior physical attributes and flawless technique. But Sarah had learned something in the Proxima campaigns that no amount of training could teach. Sometimes the best plan was no plan at all. Instead of trying to match his technical skill, she began fighting erratically, using desperate moves that violated every principle of proper combat. She threw her knife at his face, not to kill, but to create an opening. When he deflected it easily, she was already moving, using her momentum to tackle him around the legs. The champion went down hard, his perfect balance finally disrupted. Sarah rolled away before he could counter, scooping up her knife and immediately pressing another chaotic attack. "Impossible," she heard one of the watching Zephyrians mutter. "She fights without discipline, without form. She fights like a human." Another replied, and Sarah caught something in that voice, not dismissal, but wonder. The combat continued, Sarah using every dirty trick she'd learned in years of fighting enemies who were stronger, faster, and better equipped than her forces. She couldn't win through superior skill, so she won through superior unpredictability. When Crafto finally managed to disarm her, pinning her to the ground with his energy blade at her throat, Sarah was battered, bleeding, but still defiant. "You have fought bravely, human Chun Sarah," the champion said, his voice carrying unexpected respect, "but you have lost. Will you accept defeat honorably?" Sarah looked up at her opponent, then at the watching Zephyrians, and made a decision. That would change everything. "Champion Crofto," she said, her voice clear despite her exhaustion, "would you please help me to my feet?" The simple word "please" had an effect Sarah never could have anticipated. The champion's blade wavered, his silver blue skin shifting to colors she'd never seen before. Around the arena, the watching Zephyrians fell silent. What did? "You say?" Crofto asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I asked if you would please help me up," Sarah repeated, confused by the reaction. "I know I lost, but I'd like to face the consequences standing." The champion's energy blade deactivated. Entirely. He stepped back, his hands trembling, actually trembling, as he stared at her. You asked," he said, his voice filled with something that sounded like wonder. "You defeated me in combat, and you asked." "I didn't defeat you," Sarah protested, accepting his offered hand and getting to her feet. "You won. Fair and square." "No," War Commander Thexry said, his voice carrying across the arena. "Champion Crofto speaks truly. You have achieved something we thought impossible." Sarah looked around the chamber, noting that every Zephyrian present was staring at her with expressions she couldn't read. "I don't understand." "The word you used," Thexry continued, approaching slowly as if she were a dangerous weapon. "In over 3,000 years of hegemony expansion, no species has ever asked. They demand, they beg, they threaten, they surrender, but they never please." The last word came out as barely a whisper, and Sarah saw something that shattered every assumption she'd held about the Zephyrian hegemony. War Commander Thexry, supreme military leader of one of the galaxy's most feared civilizations, had tears streaming down his face. "I don't understand," Sarah repeated, but she was beginning to suspect that she'd stumbled onto something far more significant than a simple diplomatic mission. 3,000 years, Thexry continued, his voice breaking with emotion. 3,000 years of conquest, of demanding submission, of taking what we needed because we had the power to take it. And in all that time, no one has ever asked. "You ask nicely for anything." Sarah felt the weight of revelation settling over her. "You're not conquerors by choice, are you? You're conquerors because it's the only way anyone has ever dealt with you." "We became what the galaxy expected us to be," Champion Crafto said, his own voice thick with emotion. "Strong, because only the strong survive. Demanding, because only demands are respected. Feared, because fear is all we have ever known from others." The arena had become a chamber of revelation, where Sarah began to understand that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their military prowess. It was their ability to see past the surface, to recognize that even the most fearsome predator might simply be responding to a hostile environment. "What happens now?" she asked, looking around at the assembled Zephyrians. "Now," War Commander Thexry said, his tears still flowing freely, "we learn what it means to be asked instead of commanded. We learn what it means to be treated as partners instead of conquerors, as the implications of her simple act of politeness began to unfold, Sarah realized that her mission had succeeded in ways she never could have imagined. But she also sensed that this was only the beginning, that the real work of building an alliance would require her to understand not just what the Zephyrians had become, but what they had been before 3 millennia of warfare had shaped them into the galaxy's most feared military force. The chamber fell silent, except for the quiet sounds of powerful beings experiencing emotions they had forgotten they possessed. And in that silence, Sarah began to understand that sometimes the most profound victories came not from superior firepower or brilliant tactics, but from the simple act of treating others with basic human decency. But even as hope bloomed in her chest, she knew the hardest part was yet to come. The Zephyrians might be willing to consider partnership now, but 3,000 years of military culture wouldn't change overnight. And somewhere in the depths of space, the Void War continued to rage, threatening to consume everything both species held dear. The Grand Council Chamber of the Zephyrian hegemony was a vast amphitheater carved from what appeared to be a single piece of dark crystal, with tiers of seats rising in concentric circles around a central platform. As Sarah entered, still bearing the marks of her combat with Champion Crefdo, she felt the weight of hundreds of alien gazes upon her. War Commander Vexri had insisted she appear before the Council exactly as she was, battered, bloodied, but unbowed. Now she understood why. The assembled Zephyrians needed to see that humanity could face their greatest warrior and still maintain dignity in defeat. "Honored counselors," Vexri announced, his voice carrying across the vast chamber, "I present Human Chun Sarah of the Terran Alliance. She has done something that challenges everything we thought we knew about lesser species." A murmur rippled through the assembled Zephyrians, their skin colors shifting in waves of curiosity and skepticism. Sarah noticed that many of the counselors were ancient, even by Zephyrian standards, their forms bearing the scars of countless battles. "Speak, human," commanded High Counselor Vextra from the highest tier, her voice carrying the authority of ages. "What sorcery did you use to affect our war commander so profoundly?" Sarah looked up at the hundreds of faces surrounding her, each one representing a civilization that had conquered star systems before her species had learned to make fire. But she'd learned something important in that arena: power without purpose was just destruction. "I used no sorcery, High Counselor. I simply asked politely for help." The chamber erupted in what Sarah could only describe as controlled chaos. Zephyrians stood, their voices rising in what seemed like arguments, though the universal translator struggled with the rapid-fire exchanges. She caught fragments: impossible, unprecedented, dangerous, before High Counselor Vextra called for order. "Explain this, asking politely," Vextra demanded. "What is the mechanism? What is the strategic purpose?" Sarah realized she was standing at the crux of two fundamentally different worldviews. "There is no strategic purpose, High Counselor. It's just courtesy, recognizing that others have the right to choose whether to help you." "Choice?" The word came from multiple counselors simultaneously, spoken like a foreign concept. "Yes," Sarah continued, finding her confidence. "When I asked Champion Crafto to help me up, I wasn't ordering him or demanding it as a right. I was acknowledging that he could say no and that I would respect that decision." "But you had been defeated," another counselor called out. "By our laws, you had no standing to make any requests." "By your laws, perhaps. But by human understanding, every being has inherent dignity, regardless of their position in any hierarchy." The silence that followed was profound. Sarah could see Zephyrians throughout the chamber exchanging glances, their skin colors shifting in patterns she was beginning to recognize as deep thought and confusion. High Counselor Vextra leaned forward. "You suggest that power does not determine worth?" "I suggest that power without empathy is just tyranny wearing different clothes." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah saw some counselors recoil as if struck, while others seemed to consider her statement with growing interest. For 3,000 years, War Commander Zephyrian said, stepping forward, we have expanded through strength. We conquered because others could not stop us. We demanded because we had the power to enforce our will. And where has it led us? Asked a voice from the middle tiers. Sarah turned to see a scarred Zephyrian rising from his seat. We control a third of the galaxy, yet we are locked in endless war. We have power, but no peace. We have territory, but no ... What would humans call it? No joy? Counselor Mordic speaks truth, Zephyrian acknowledged. We have become a civilization of warriors fighting wars we no longer remember starting, for purposes that died with our ancestors. Sarah felt a shift in the chamber's atmosphere. The rigid formality was giving way to something she'd never expected. To see from the Zephyrian hegemony genuine self-reflection. High Counselor, she said, addressing Vextra directly, may I ask you something? The ancient Zephyrian's eyes narrowed. You may. When was the last time someone asked the hegemony for help instead of demanding it or trying to take what they needed by force? Vextra was quiet for so long that Sarah wondered if the question had been translated incorrectly. Finally, the High Counselor spoke, her voice barely audible. Never, in all my cycles of service to the hegemony, no species has ever approached us seeking aid. They come with ultimatums, with threats, with bribes, or with surrender, but never with requests for assistance. Because they're afraid of you, Sarah said gently. Your reputation precedes you. By the time most species encounter the hegemony, they've already heard stories of worlds conquered, populations enslaved, resources stripped. They approach you expecting violence because that's what they've been taught to expect. But you did not, observed Counselor Mordic. Why? Sarah considered the question carefully. Because I was taught that every interaction is a choice. I could choose to see you as monsters, or I could choose to see you as potential allies facing the same threats we face. The Void War affects us all. The Void War, repeated another counselor, his voice heavy with weariness. 50 years of stalemate against the consortium. Our fleets clash, worlds burn, and nothing changes. What if it could change? Sarah asked, what if there was another way? Speak, commanded High Counselor Vexed. R.A. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words could determine the fate of both their species. The human military doctrine includes something called asymmetric warfare. We've learned that when facing a stronger opponent, you don't try to match their strength. You change the rules of engagement entirely. Explain, Zephyrian said, his tactical mind clearly engaged. The consortium expects you to fight them the way you always have: massive fleets, direct confrontation, overwhelming force. But what if you didn't? What if you used humanity's gift for irregular tactics combined with Zephyrian military technology? The chamber fell silent as hundreds of warrior minds began processing the implications. You propose joint operations, Counselor Mordic said slowly. Human tactical innovation supported by Zephyrian firepower. I propose more than that, Sarah replied, her confidence growing. I propose that we stop thinking about this as the hegemony's war or humanity's war, and start thinking about it as our war. Pool our resources, our knowledge, our different perspectives. Partnership, High Counselor Vextra said, testing the word. True partnership, not the client-state arrangement we offered. Yes, because I believe that together we could end the Void War instead of just prolonging it. The debate that followed was unlike anything in Zephyrian history. For hours, counselors argued, questioned, and challenged every assumption they'd held about warfare, diplomacy, and their place in the galaxy. Sarah found herself at the center of philosophical discussions that would have seemed impossible when she'd first entered the chamber. The breakthrough came when Counselor Mordic posed a simple question. If we accepted this partnership, what would you ask of us first? Sarah didn't hesitate. I would ask you to please consider a joint mission to the Kepler sector. Intelligence suggests the Consortium is building a new type of weapon there. A combined human Zephyrian task force could investigate and, if necessary, neutralize the threat. You would trust us with intelligence about Consortium activities? Asked another counselor. If we're going to be partners, trust has to start somewhere. High Counselor Vestra stood, her ancient form commanding absolute attention. The proposal before this council is unprecedented. To abandon 3 millennia of proven military doctrine, to share power with the species we first met today, to risk our strategic advantages on the promise of ... cooperation. Sarah's heart sank. She'd pushed too far, too fast. However, Vestra continued, and Sarah's hope rekindled. We have also heard something today that no Zephyrian has heard in living memory. We have been asked politely and with respect to help. Not commanded, not threatened, not bribed, asked. The High Counselor's skin shifted to colors Sarah had never seen before, deep purples and golds that seemed to pulse with inner light. Old, Vestra said, her voice carrying across the chamber. I have lived through 100 campaigns, seen 1,000 worlds conquered. And in all that time, I have felt nothing but the satisfaction of victory or the sting of defeat. Today, for the first time in centuries, I feel something else. What do you feel, High Counselor? War Commander Thuxri asked gently. Hope. The words seemed to transform the entire chamber. Zephyrians throughout the amphitheater began to exhibit the same color patterns as their leader, creating a cascade of purple and gold that was beautiful beyond description. The council will vote, Vestra announced. All in favor of accepting humanity's proposal for true partnership? The response was unanimous. Hundreds of Zephyrian hands raised in agreement, their voices joining in a harmony that the universal translator rendered as a simple yes, but which clearly carried meanings that transcended language. As the vote concluded, Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. War Commander Thuxri stood beside her. His expression transformed from the rigid military bearing she'd first encountered. Ambassador Chen, he said, and she noticed he'd changed her title. Would you please transmit to your leadership that the Zephyrian hegemony formally accepts the Terran Alliance's proposal for strategic partnership? The word please still came with effort, but it came more naturally than before. Sarah smiled, feeling the weight of success and responsibility settling on her shoulders. I will, War Commander. Thank you. No, Thuxri replied, his voice filled with emotion. Thank you. You have given us something we thought we had lost forever. What's that? The possibility of being something other than conquerors. As the council began to disperse, Sarah found herself surrounded by Zephyrians who had never experienced anything like this moment. They approached hesitantly, unsure how to interact with someone they considered an equal rather than a subordinate. Or enemy, Ambassador Chen. One of them said. She thought it was Counselor Mordic. Would you? That is, could you possibly? Might you be willing to remain on the station for a few days? To help us understand this partnership concept. The request was painful to hear a warrior species with 3,000 years of conquest experience, asking for help like children learning to walk. But Sarah heard something else in their voices, genuine desire to change, to become something better than what they had been. I would be honored to help, she replied, and watched as relief flooded their alien features. Later, alone in her assigned quarters, Sarah composed her report to Admiral Harrison. As she wrote, she reflected on the day's events and their implications. Humanity had gained a powerful ally, but more than that, they had potentially changed the course of galactic civilization. The Zephyrian hegemony's transformation wouldn't happen overnight. 3 millennia of military culture couldn't be erased with a single conversation. But she had seen something in their eyes that gave her hope, the recognition that there might be a better way to exist in a dangerous galaxy. The Void War still raged. The Consortium still threatened both their species. But now, for the first time since the conflict began, Sarah believed it could actually end. Not with the total victory of one side over another, but with something unprecedented in galactic history. A peace built on mutual respect and shared purpose. As she sealed her report and prepared to transmit it to Earth, Sarah allowed herself a moment of pride. She had come to negotiate an alliance and had instead catalyzed a revolution, not of weapons or technology, but of perspective. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when someone finally asked the Zephyrian hegemony nicely for help. And Sarah suspected that the answer would surprise everyone, including the Zephyrians themselves. In her final log entry for the day, she wrote, "First contact mission successful. Alliance secured. Note to command. Recommend immediate deployment of diplomatic corps trained in please and thank you." Apparently, there are most powerful weapons. Outside her window, the stars continued their ancient dance, unaware that a simple act of courtesy had just changed the fate of civilizations. But change was coming, carried on the revolutionary concept that even the mightiest warriors could be asked instead of commanded, could be partners instead of conquerors. The Void War would end. Of that, Sarah was now certain. The only question was whether the galaxy was ready for what would come after, a peace built not on the ashes of the defeated, but on the radical notion that different species could actually trust each other. Time would tell. But for now, Sarah slept peacefully, knowing that she had given two civilizations the most precious gift of all, the possibility of a better future. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.